everybody. I'm going to get him settled real quick, and I'll explain who he is before I explain who I am, because then I have your full attention, right? Ember, as Beth said, is my medical alert service dog. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and he can let me know when my blood sugar is starting to drop. And that's a conversation about monitoring and self-care and a lot of other things, and a whole other talk for another day that I'm happy to explain. But he'll be up here with me today as we're talking about DevRel qualified leads and repurposing this common business metric for your community success. So metrics and the stakeholders who continually ask, hey, what's the ROI on that, have been the bane of our existence, right? I don't know about you, but I know for me at least, I probably have made this face after a number of meetings where I've been asked those questions, and I'm continually asked to provide what my team's value is on a daily basis. But what if we shift the mentality? Not their mentality necessarily, although that would be nice too, but our mentality. What if we view metrics as not the bane of our existence, but something that we can use to prove our value? And I would argue that the only way for us to do this is to focus on metrics that reflect the talents that we have. Before we're forced into metrics that don't fit our skill set, or before we're told that we have to do particular things that really belong to another department or don't line up with the work that we're doing, let's set our own metrics that truly reflect the value that we bring to the table and the work that we uniquely do. So, what metrics are these, you may ask? I call these metrics DevRel qualified leads. And developer relations is the community building side of things that I usually deal with. At the end of the day, developer relations is community building with a technical audience and setting these technical folks up for success and enabling them to do their best work, just like we do with all of our communities. So what exactly do I mean by DevRel or community qualified leads, and how does this relate back to metrics? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you got scanned by a sponsor who was here yesterday? Cool. How many of you are familiar with the term marketing qualified lead? Awesome. So most of you are, and a lot of you got scanned yesterday. And those of you who got scanned at this conference or another conference, is probably now a marketing qualified lead for some company out there, right? And what that basically means is someone at a conference scanned your badge because you said that you were interested in their product. The marketing team then vets your information, makes sure that you hit the various standards that they're looking for or the expectations they have for potential customers, and then passes your information off to sales. And then their job is done, right? They aren't responsible for selling. They aren't responsible for following up. They aren't responsible for making sure that the sales team does their job. They just pass you off to sales, and then you're the sales team's responsibility. And this is a fairly well understood business metric in most companies. It's typically accepted that sales is a multi-step process, and marketing is that top of the funnel responsibility. But once marketing's job is done, they go back to finding more leads. They look at people who have visited the website or gone to other events or connected with the product in some way to vet that they might be potential customers, and then again, pass them off to sales. So some of you may be asking, why did I choose a term like qualified leads when it has such a direct connection to sales? If you're familiar with any of my work or read any of my blog posts or know anything that I've done, you probably know that I don't believe developer relations or community should ever have sales metrics, right? Those aren't the numbers that are attached with us. I'm seeing cheers from the crowd. Sorry if I worried any of you. But I really don't believe that we should ever have sales metrics under our belt. It muddies our work too much. It makes our relationship building confusing. And in general, it makes things that should be a genuine relationship just revolve around money, which isn't sustainable for our team or for the company. However, most business people know what you mean when you say qualified lead. And while they might only initially think that it relates back to sales, you can add on top of that foundational knowledge that, marketing gets the qualified lead and passes it off to sales, and now it's sales responsibility, and introduce this idea, build on top of that we can do that with other people as well. We can expand that idea of leads to beyond just people passed along to sales. And as I'm sure we all know, it's easier to add on top of knowledge that already exists rather than introducing a completely new metric and a completely new area that someone now has to understand. And by asking people to accept this new definition of leads to include folks who can contribute value to the company in some way, monetary or otherwise, we can expand this meaning of the word and therefore insert ourselves into the business conversations in a way that's understood, because now we're speaking the same language. And that's a huge part of what I think the gap has been with community management and developer relations up until this point, is we struggle to get involved in those business conversations because we're not on the same page as the stakeholders are. So I came up with this term after meeting with yet another one of my clients whose team was responsible for metrics that really do belong to other teams, whether that was sales leads, how many people signed up for the product, even if it was the free product, how many people applied to our open jobs this week or this month, how many leads did we get from that conference that we just sponsored. And these are all things that DevRel and community professionals have zero control over the end result of, right? Maybe the person that we met at the conference who would be a great fit at the company didn't hit it off with the hiring manager. Or maybe they didn't even make it to the hiring manager because of some weird quirk in their resume that the recruiter didn't like. Maybe once they get to the interview process, they don't click well with the hiring team. Whatever the case may be, we can't be held responsible for whether or not that individual gets hired, right? We have no say as far as salary, negotiation, team structure, or any number of other things that go into the hiring process. But we are capable of passing off those connections to the right team in hopes that together they'll be able to accomplish a task that furthers the overarching company goals. So let me give you a few examples of what this looks like. With marketing, this may be that you know someone on the forum who gives great answers and gives really thorough responses to questions that people have. Or someone who's been really effusive about how much they love your product, right? You could pass them off to marketing and they may be great for a case study or for writing some guest blog posts on your site. With product, if you're getting exceptional feedback from an individual, maybe you just pass them directly off to product instead of continuing to be the messenger back and forth and trading the emails back and forth between your product team and that community member. Or maybe you've got a new feature that's in beta that you're looking to launch and you've got a few customers that have been specifically asking for that feature for a long time. You can intro them to the product team to be involved as beta testers. Next up, engineering. If someone runs into a really hard to solve or hard to duplicate bug, they might be willing to help your engineering team either reproduce the bug or, if it's a technical community member, work through the code themselves with the engineering team to help them figure out where the problem might be. Next up, business development and partnerships. I've run into a number of community members at different companies where they know for a fact that an integration with their company and with our product would be great for both their customers and ours, but maybe our engineering team doesn't have time to make that integration. There's times when those community members are willing to put in that time and effort themselves, and making an intro there to our business development or our partnerships teams can really help integrate the products in a way that's beneficial for both customers. Next up, recruiting, which I mentioned earlier, right? There's times when we come across community members who are a perfect fit for our company culture. They're already involved in the product in their free time. They're already giving back. They're already passionate about the topics and about the community. They might be a really great fit for a number of jobs that are available at your company right now. And of course, if you run into someone who's interested in purchasing your product, you can pass them or their manager along to sales. And you get the idea. These connections are incredibly valuable and might not have ever happened if it weren't for us being involved in the communities that were around and the communities that now know and trust us. And one important thing to note, it's important to maintain that trust. So as you're passing those community members off to your colleagues, make sure you sit down with your colleagues and they understand the relationship that you have with them and the importance of maintaining that relationship, because you want to make sure that that relationship is still good with the community member after they've talked to your after they've talked to your colleague internally. And so picking and choosing who you pass community members off to, maybe having a conversation company-wide about, when community members are passed off, then please reach out to me again before you reach out to them directly if you have another request for them, things like that, to protect the community from getting inundated by requests from across the company now that you've introduced them to a handful of your coworkers. But these DevRel and community qualified leads are incredibly important to keep track of for a number of reasons. The most obvious one, of course, is that it's a definitive way to attribute the value of the activities that you're involved in already. The work that you're already doing naturally as a part of your job can now be tracked directly to the value that the company is seeing, whether that's community-generated blog posts or content, whether that's sales leads, whether that's recruits, or any of the other things we talked about on the previous slide. But it's an easy way to be able to point when someone says, hey, all of these things that you did in the last quarter, what good did that do for the company? For you to go, well, all of these interactions resulted in these direct benefits that helped further the goals of other teams. And that increases your value not only to those specific teams, but across the company. For instance, also with tracking the goals and the themes throughout the community, if you run into, let's say in my world, front-end developers who are super interested in your product, but you're typically aiming at folks who are on the security or operations side of things, you'll want to make a note of that. Because making a note of those anomalies help you be able to track trends across the industry. Or maybe you start to see interest from a non-technical group of people. And so making notes where you see those changes and where those, like I said, anomalies or oddities are is important because you can then track those as you watch across the quarter, across half the year, across the full year, across a few years to see if there's trends in certain directions. Maybe suddenly there's a PC or product that can be used by a non-technical audience, and that wasn't anticipated before. Or you've got a slightly different community that you can dig into on the side that might not be as big as your core community, but has some good potential. These leads also contribute community value, right? Because as you're making these introductions between community members and your coworkers, you're amplifying the work that the community members are doing, and you're also making connections between community members themselves. So my favorite analogy for this comes from a good friend of mine named Amy Hermes. She calls community managers cruise directors. And how many of you have been on a cruise? Anyone? A couple? Okay. I never have. This is a picture from Halloween a few years ago when we dressed up as like the epitome of tourists and people perhaps on a cruise. But the idea is that as people who are out in the community, we're able to see people who aren't connected, right? We're able to take care of people who might be standing off on the side of the room instead of engaged with the core group, either online or in person. And it's this idea that we're the people who are responsible to make sure everyone's having a good experience. So we're the cruise directors of our communities. And those people who mention the new topics they are pursuing, whether they're the non-technical people or the front-end developers, or they're exploring a new avenue that you wouldn't have thought of with your product before, you can introduce them. So Beth, let me introduce you to Sam, and the two of you can talk about all of the awesome things that you've been discovering lately. And I'm going to kind of fade into the background. But I'm also going to make sure that you report back to me later and let me know, like, hey, how was the conversation? How did it go? Are there any interesting points that might be helpful for me to bring back to my team so that I can, again, track those trends and themes as I see them throughout the community? And we as community managers are doing this already, right? So many of us are in this profession not because we studied it in college, although I've heard of a few people starting to do that, and it's making me feel really old because none of that was around when I was getting started. But so many of us have done this in our professional lives, or excuse me, in our personal lives for years. And it was just kind of a natural step for us to start doing this in our professional lives, right? We're already connecting people. Personally, we're connecting friends. We're making sure that people feel involved and included. And so we have this talent of connecting people, but that's hard to quantify, and it's hard to explain to stakeholders in your company that, well, a big part of my job is relationship building. And they go, great. Right? You spent a few $100s buying a group of people coffee or dinner, and that benefits the company how? And so this highlights our unique value. It brings in things that we're already doing, and also lets us explain to other people in the company what value that gives the company at the end of the day. But so what? Who cares, right? Why, at the end of the day, do these connections truly matter? And this isn't a question that I probably need to answer for you all, because we know that these connections matter. But they matter because of the core definition and purpose of community building, which I think some stakeholders and companies still don't understand. And at its foundation, the purpose of community building, the reason why we build these relationships with people, is to empower and enable our various communities. And this empowerment is beneficial both for the company as well as the community. I love this quote from Zan Markin. He wrote a blog post recently called "Developer Relations is Developer Enablement." And I think it applies to all communities, whether or not they're technical. And it says this: enabled developers are productive, less likely to churn, and better suited to champion our products and services inside their teams, organizations, and wider networks. And this idea of connecting with people so that they don't stop using our product, or so that they are more likely to become advocates for us, external advocates, and things like that is a huge value to the company. And as soon as we can start using terms like churn or productivity or external advocates who are marketing on our behalf, if we're using these business terms that other people within the business and our stakeholders understand, it makes it easier for us to argue for more resources and more headcount down the road. Twilio's developer evangelism team puts it this way. They say, our job is to inspire and equip developers to build the next generation of amazing applications. This means understanding what they're trying to do, pointing them to tools and training, and generally helping them be successful. And it's not to say that this isn't an inexpensive endeavor, right? This takes a lot of work. Understanding what people are trying to do means spending time talking to them, means traveling to where they are, means face-to-face interactions, and then building the tools and the training that they need in order to be successful. But part of inspiring, equipping, enabling, and empowering our communities is also connecting them with each other, as well as internally with our company. And I think our non-technical folks in the audience familiar with at least the company name of Twilio? Nods. Awesome. So the fact that people are familiar with Twilio as a company, and the fact that Twilio's developer evangelism team is viewed as one of the best in the industry, shows that these types of things can be incredibly powerful and incredibly valuable, both, again, to the community as well as the company. So as we're building these relationships, making introductions, connecting people in ways that they can be more successful, I think it's time to take that unique ability, the thing that we're doing without thinking about it, right? The thing that we do best that makes us good at our jobs, and turn it into a metric that can not only benefit the company, but the community as well. And at the same time, gives us a tangible way to prove our value. And this is the third reason why I think qualified leads is a good way to do this. We need a single metric of success that can be used across the industry. Because so many times when people, whether they're stakeholders in our company or not, say, hey, what's your metric of success to show that you're doing your job and that your team should still be at this company? We kind of go, well, it depends, right? It depends on the company. And I don't think that's a bad or wrong answer. In fact, I tell my clients on a regular basis when they ask me up front before we've done any conversation that's in-depth enough for me to understand where they're coming from, your goals are going to be specific to your company. So the metrics that you have are going to be specific to your company. But I think at the end of the day, we need something to point the stakeholders to so that it's not just this vague, well, it depends on your company. And if I know more about you, I can tell you what those goals and metrics might be. And I think this DevRel and community qualified leads can fill that gap. It can give us a single metric across the industry that everyone can point to in order to understand that we can move the industry forward, because our stakeholders now have something to point to. They have something to hold on to that lets them know, even if they can't understand all of the nuance of our jobs and everything that we do in order to get to this point, it gives them a way to allow us the opportunity to pull the correct levers, try the various things that we need to try, and figure out a way to show other types of value as well, while still saying, cool, I know that they're bringing leads back throughout the company that can benefit the various departments, therefore benefiting the entire company. So it's because of all of these reasons that I propose this metric, DevRel or community qualified leads, as just one of the ways that we can better prove our value. And I have a number of clients who are customers of mine, as well as other people who have heard me give similar talks like this, who have actually started applying this. They're using it the same as marketing teams are, right? You have a set goal that we're going to come away with X number of qualified leads by the end of the quarter, 6 months, or a year. And then they follow up and see how those leads are performing and use that feedback from various teams and people that they're passing those community people off to see how they can better serve both the community and the company in the future. And so building up this idea that we have our own form of keeping track of our community members and keeping track of the points of contact that we have that we're then passing off to other teams throughout the company. And we can directly track our value both for ourselves as well as for our stakeholders. Thanks so much for your time today. You can find all my information up on the screen. My DMs on Twitter are open. I always love talking about community and developer relations. I know I don't have time for questions, but we have the break after this. So if anyone wants to chat more, feel free to come up and chat, or you can reach me online. Thanks so much.